Hello, this is Performance Perspectives. I'm going to step away from the tech just a little bit. So a little bit about me. My name is David Klee. I'm the founder of Heraflux Technologies. We work with both data and infrastructure and how they come together. So what you're going to get here is just a little taste of what we go through a lot of times with a lot of different performance challenges with different converged architectures. I want to step away from the tech. When was the last time you had somebody in your environment tell you something's running slow and you've gone and taken a really good look at the systems that you're responsible for and everything looks fine? It's a big common challenge. I had one environment, the DBAs were saying everything was running slow. The infrastructure team said everything was fine. It's the only meeting I've ever been in where somebody physically threw a chair. And in the end of the day, they were both right. When you have an infrastructure stack like this, these are very complex environments. There's a lot of different pieces, a lot of different moving parts. And when you have the perspective of one team that knows what they do very well, but they may not know the intricacies and the nuances of the other layers, the other applications, the other pieces of the puzzle, things get very challenging very quickly when you're trying to solve performance problems. And that's why what I want you to do is to understand the realities of monitoring, where you have to understand each piece. If you fix a bottleneck in one area, the bottlenecks shift. You will always have a bottleneck. The question is it good enough? A lot of times we clean up storage, we go with all flash, we go with these different areas, and things change. The question is, do they change for the better? Do they change for the worse? What does it do to other different areas and layers? You know, the biggest areas I've got right now, DBA says everything is slow, and occasionally they're actually able to put into, quantify what's actually going on. This is an actual case study of mine. 142 millisecond average response time from storage. They were on all flash. The SAN admin said everything was perfectly fine. They were both right. The VM admins were saying everything was good. DBAs are still arguing. It's not cool. And you end up with just a ticking time bomb. You know, people were mad. They were fighting this problem for 9 full months. Monitor everything and step back and just visualize what you've got. Put these pieces of the puzzle visually on a whiteboard and crayon if you want. Start to put it together. Draw the lines at the different layers. That's the SAN. In this case, the SAN was saying 0.8 milliseconds. Everything was fine. So what's on the other side between that database and that SAN? There's a lot in there. So first of all, monitor things like HPA queue depths, port contention, switches. They have CPUs, they have memory, they've got buffers in there. Start to monitor all these things. There's a lot of really great utilities out there that can help you do this. At the physical machine, same thing goes. HPA queue depths, command queuing, per port consumption, all these things you can objectively measure very easily. You go in the hypervisor itself, you look at the host hardware, you look at the backplane consumption, multipathing, everything that you can possibly get out of the VMware environment. But there's a lot more than that. You have to get into the operating system, you have to get into the application in order to put these different pieces together. At the VM, I want to measure the Windows SCSI queue depth. I want to measure things like CPU ready time, co-stop, to see if there's any artificial problems there. You get into Windows now, SQL Server, very disk intensive, it's very sensitive to a lot of problems there. I have things like SCSI controller queues inside Windows that may actually start to bottleneck before the hypervisor actually sees it. SCSI controller type. This is why the paravirtual driver, we can go set the queue depth there. And then take a look at the data file, the disks. All of these different areas, they can start to bottleneck. These are things that DBAs can actually help you with. Things like the number of database data files, the number of the tables and the indexing strategies, all these different things. And then all the way down to the I/O engine inside SQL Server, you can do tuning of these different areas to make things better. 100% of the time, you need to be collecting performance metrics all the time, across the board, very granularly. Yeah, it eats a little bit of space to do it. There's not a lot of overhead to do it. And what it gives you is the ability to drill into these different areas at any one point in time, go take these metrics and compare them. And what you'll find is that things are very, very different. For example, in this particular case, 0.8 millisecond read average, 0.6 millisecond write average at the LUN. That's great. That's fantastic. The queues inside the switches, we had 128 max queue depth. We were averaging 60 to 75. We weren't overwhelming anything. Things were okay. Maximum throughput that we were seeing was 6.2 gigabytes or gigabit a second on 8 gig fiber. No big deal, CPUs are fine. So let's move up just a little bit, okay? There, max queue depth per port, well below what the max queue depth was set at. 8 gig fiber, same kind of thing. We see the exact same throughput. So okay, so things look okay. So let's move up a little bit. Okay, data store latency as observed by VMware was very close to what the SAN itself was showing. That's wonderful. That means the networking and the interconnects between those layers are perfectly fine. Okay, so step forward a little bit. In this case, this particular environment just had one disk controller configured inside Windows. So what we were seeing was that perfmon was showing a lot higher latency. This is all flash. They're showing a lot higher latency than what the hypervisor is showing. So right there, you've got the start of a bottleneck, and you can see it very, very easily. Now, what SQL Server, database, which we do a lot of, was showing, we're having very high read latencies and very high write latencies in one particular hotspot on one big database system. Our CPU, not that bad, 19%. It's pretty busy, but it's pretty good. Okay, so in this case, we saw that there was a disconnect between the VM layer and the Windows layer. So we added more SCSI controllers. We used paravirtual, spread out the workloads. Perfmon shifted. Look at everything upstream and downstream. In this case, perfmon shifted from about 30 down to about 1.2 millisecond. That's still pretty darn good. And SQL Server, though, was showing disk latency a little bit higher at one particular database. It means we had the bottleneck, latency bottleneck, inside that particular database. So what we ended up doing, we went in and we added more, we did a really solid index review to try to cut I/O consumption down. We added more database data files here to spread out the workload a little bit, and then we were able to bring that read latency back down in line with what everything else was showing. Now, how did the system change? The system changed when our CPU consumption went from the teens up to close to 50%. Everything was getting more efficient, and it was actually shifting the bottleneck back onto the database design and the code. It's got to be a constant process. What are our bottlenecks? How do we detect them? Is that bottleneck good enough? Because in some cases it might actually be. Review what's going on, turn around, fix it. Watch what happens to the entire system and fix one thing at a time. Turn around and do it again and do it again until finally, when you find through all this objective monitoring and triage that the performance metrics line up and everything looks good and whatever bottlenecks you can detect are good enough, then sit back, relax a little bit, and then turn around and do it again soon and validate that everything looks good. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me here at heraflux.com. Thanks a lot.